The alarm at way station threshold 9 did not scream. That was the first wrong thing, and Envoy Salik Tor noticed it before he noticed anything else. Every alarm he had ever heard in 40 cycles of service had a voice. The proximity alarms wailed. The pressure alarms barked. The boarding alarms hammered out a rhythm meant to push a body out of sleep and into a corridor. But the alarm that woke him in the gray hours of the night cycle only blinked. A soft amber pulse on the ceiling of his quarters, patient and slow, like something that did not want to be sure of itself yet. He lay still for a moment and let his 3 hearts settle. He was old enough to know that the quiet alarms were the ones that mattered. The loud ones were for accidents. The quiet ones were for choices. Salik dressed in the dark. He was a thin creature of the Velmari, long in the limb and gray in the skin, and his people had built their whole civilization on the art of not being seen. He pulled his envoy's robe over his shoulders and felt the old fear move in him, the fear he had carried since he was a child on the inner worlds, the fear that one day the dark would look back. The corridor lights came up to half as he stepped out. Threshold 9 was a border station, one of 9,000 that ringed the edge of the concord of settled light, and at this hour it should have been nearly empty. Instead, the corridor was full of running. Envoy, a young station officer, caught his arm, a Velmari girl with her crest still pale, barely past her first molt. They asked for you by name, the watch commander. He said, "Wake the envoy, no one else." By name, Salik repeated. He did not like that. He had spent his life arranging to not be named. Did he say why? He said, "There is a hole in the dark," she said, and then she let go of his arm and ran on, because she did not understand what she had just said, and he did. A hole in the dark. That was an old phrase. His grandmother had used it. It meant something had appeared where the censors said nothing should be, and worse, it meant the something had chosen to appear, had peeled back whatever had been hiding it, and was now simply there, letting itself be seen. Salik walked faster. The command deck of Threshold 9 was a ring of pale instruments around a central well, and the well showed the space outside the station as a slow-turning bowl of stars. When Salik entered, every officer in the ring was silent, and every face was turned toward the well, and in the well, against the stars, hung a shape that had not been there an hour before. It was a ship. He understood that much at once, but it was a ship, the way a mountain is a stone. It was long and dark and unhurried, and the station's lights, reaching out across the gap, found nothing on its hull to shine back. The light simply went into it and did not return. It was the color of the space between stars, only deeper, and along its flank ran no markings, no lanterns, no honest running lights that any decent vessel showed so its neighbors would not fear it. "How long?" Salik said. The watch commander, a heavy-set Velmari named Doru, did not turn from the well. 11 minutes, he said. It came out of nothing. No drive bloom, no approach. The long-range net had a clean field, 11 minutes ago, and then it had that. It decloaked, Salik said. We don't have a word for what it did, Doru said. Cloaks bend light. We can see a bent field. We know what that looks like. Every cloaked ship in the Concorde leaves a smear. This left nothing. It was not bending the light around itself. It was simply not being seen, and then it decided otherwise. Salik felt the old fear stand up fully inside him now and stretch. The Velmari were the masters of unseeing. That was their gift and their whole inheritance. For 10,000 cycles they had hidden their worlds inside folds of perception, had taught the younger species the art of the veil, had sold cloaking and shielding and misdirection to half the Concorde, and kept the best of it for themselves. No one slipped past a Velmari watch, no one. The Velmari did not boast of much, but they boasted of that. And something had just sat 11 minutes off their border, fully cloaked by a method they could not detect, and the only reason they knew it was there at all was that it had chosen to be known. Has it spoken? Salik asked. It is speaking now, Doru said. That is why I woke you. The watch commander gestured, and the deck filled with a voice. It was not loud. That was the thing Salik would remember afterward, when he tried to explain it to the council, when he tried to explain it to anyone. The voice was even and unhurried, and it spoke in clean trade tongue, the common speech of the border, and it did not raise itself at all. "This is the human survey vessel, Quiet Lantern," the voice said. "We are passing through. We do not intend harm. We are transmitting our registry and our heading. We ask only acknowledgement." The deck was silent. "Human," Salik said softly. The word meant almost nothing to him. It meant a rumor. It meant a line in a trade index. A species from somewhere coreward and inward. A young people. A small people. A people who had bought passage rights through the Concord 40 cycles ago, and then mostly kept to a handful of dull green worlds and made no trouble. There were 1,000 species like that. The Concord cataloged them and forgot them. He had never once thought of them as a people who could put a hole in the dark. "Registry confirms," said one of the ring officers, a thin, nervous Velmari hunched over a panel. "It matches. Human survey vessel, Quiet Lantern, filed heading, is a cordward arc, perfectly legal. They are inside a chartered lane. By every law of the Concord, they have the right to be here." "Then why," Doru said, low, "is the survey vessel 3,000 spans long?" Salik turned to him. "Survey vessels are small," Doru said. "Survey vessels are little darting things. A crew of 20. They map dust clouds and trade routes. I have boarded survey vessels. They smell of dust and bad food, and they have one weapon, a mining laser, to cut samples. That," he pointed at the well, at the long dark shape that drank the light. "That is not a survey vessel. I have served 30 cycles, and I have never seen a hull that size, not even on the Concord's own war fleets, not even the deep ones we are not supposed to know about. That is the largest single object I have ever seen move under its own choice, and it is calling itself a survey vessel, and it is being polite." A small, cold understanding began to open in Salik Tor, the kind that comes too late to be useful, and too early to be ignored. A people who could hide a thing that size from the masters of hiding. A people who had chosen, after 40 silent cycles, to let one such thing be seen, here, on a border, at this hour, and were now asking, in a soft and even voice, for nothing but acknowledgement. "Send the acknowledgement," Salik said. Doru looked at him. "Send it," Salik said again. "Send the courtesy reply. Tell them Threshold 9 sees them and wishes them safe passage. Do it now, while they are still asking politely, because a thing that asks politely is a thing that has not yet decided it needs to stop asking." But the watch commander did not send it, because the watch commander was not the highest authority on Threshold 9 that night. A second light woke on the command ring, a deep blue light, and it meant a priority channel had opened from the inner net, from the Concord's own fleet authority, from someone far above a border station, someone who had been watching the well from another room across 100 light years, and had decided that this matter was theirs. A new voice came onto the deck, and this one was loud, and this one had no fear in it at all, and Salik knew at once that it belonged to someone who had never in their life seen a hole in the dark and learned to be afraid of it. "Threshold 9, this is Fleet Marshal Oren Kavul, of the Concord Border Command," the voice said. "You will not send any courtesy. You will hold. The unidentified vessel is in violation of approach protocol and has employed a concealment method that is itself a hostile act under Concord law. I am inbound with a screening force. You will instruct the vessel to power down and stand by for inspection and seizure. Do not, under any circumstance, acknowledge it as a peer." Salik closed his eyes. He had spent 40 cycles learning the one true lesson of his people, the lesson written under all their cleverness, the lesson that had kept the Velmari alive while older and louder species turned to dust. The lesson was simple. When something can see you, and you cannot see it, you do not give it orders. You give it room. "Marshal," Salik said, leaning toward the channel, keeping his voice as even as he could make it. "This is Envoy Salik Tor. I advise against this. We do not understand their concealment. We do not understand their size. They have broken no law. They have asked for one thing, which is acknowledgement, and they have asked twice, gently. I have lived a long time, Marshal, and I am telling you, a thing that hides that well, and shows itself anyway, is not showing itself by accident. It is showing us a door. We should walk through it with our hands open." "You are an envoy," the Marshal said, and there was contempt under the word, like rot under bark. "You arrange the seating at dinners. I command the border. Hold the station, Tor. The screening force will arrive in 90 minutes. We will teach this survey vessel what a border means. The channel closed. In the well, the long dark shape hung patient against the stars, and the soft amber alarm on the ceiling kept its slow blink, and the human voice came once more, unhurried, even, asking only for acknowledgement, asking for a courtesy that a Velmari child would have known to give. Salik Tor stood at the rail of the command well and looked at the thing that had put a hole in the dark, and he understood, with the whole weight of his old gray bones, that the Concorde had just made the single worst mistake in its long and careful history. He only hoped he would live long enough to tell someone why. For 90 minutes, the human vessel did nothing. That was its own kind of pressure, Salik thought. It hung where it was, 3,000 spans of unlit hull, and it neither advanced, nor withdrew, nor armed anything that the station could detect. It simply waited, exactly as a patient thing waits, and every few minutes its even voice repeated the same request for acknowledgement, and each time the request came, it was a little harder for the command deck to breathe. Salik used the time the only way he knew how. He read. He pulled the Concorde's full file on the species called human, and he was unsurprised to find how thin it was. 40 cycles of contact, and the whole record was perhaps 1,000 lines. Homeworld coreward and inward, a wet blue planet. A people of moderate size, soft-skinned, short-lived by Velmari measure, organized into a thing they called a union of nations that the Concorde had never bothered to understand. They had bought passage rights. They had traded in metals and grain, and in odd small artworks that some inner courts had found charming. They had, on a single occasion 60 cycles before first contact, been observed at a great distance, during what the file called an internal conflict, and the observing vessel had recorded the event and filed it, and no one had read the file since. Salik read it now. It was a short entry. A long-range Velmari scout, passing the human system on a survey arc, had recorded a period of intense energy activity on and around the human world, lasting some years, which the analysts had classified as a primitive civil war between factions of the same species, crude chemical and fission weapons, vessels that crawled between worlds on burning fuel. Nothing of interest. The analysts had given it the lowest threat rating the Concorde possessed and moved on. But at the very bottom of the entry was a single line, an addendum from the scout's own commander, never acted upon, never escalated, a line so quiet that Salik almost missed it. The line read, "They fight each other with everything they have, and there are billions of them, and not one side asks the other to stop. Recommend we never give them a reason to point all of it outward at once." Salik read the line 4 times. There was more under it, a second addendum, fainter still, the kind a junior analyst adds, and a senior one deletes, and this one had survived only because the scout commander had outranked everyone who might have removed it. It described one detail the scout had captured at extreme range, near the end of the human conflict, that the threat rating system had no box for. In the final days of their war, the addendum said, the 2 largest human factions, having spent years trying to destroy one another with everything they owned, had stopped. Not because one had won, because something had appeared in their sky that neither of them understood, a derelict of unknown make drifting in from the dark, and the 2 factions, who had been killing each other by the million an hour before, had turned as one body to face it together, in less time than it took the scout to recalibrate its lens. They had buried a war that old in a single afternoon, the addendum said, the moment the dark showed them something they could not name, and then, having faced the unknown thing together, and found it only a dead hull after all, they had not gone back to killing each other, they had stayed turned outward. The addendum ended with a sentence the analysts had flagged as speculation, and the commander had refused to soften. It read, "They did not unite against each other, they united against the dark. We are the dark to them. We should be very careful never to be the thing that drifts into their sky." Salik sat with that a long while. He was old enough to recognize the shape of what he was reading, because the Velmari had a version of the same story in their own oldest records, a story of the day his people had stopped hiding from each other and started hiding from the night together, and how everything they had become had grown out of that one turning. He had simply never imagined that another species might have made the same turn, harder and faster, and with far more to point outward when they did. Then he looked up at the well, at the long dark hull that the light went into and did not leave, and he thought about a people who had spent 40 cycles being dull and small and polite, who had bought their passage and kept to their green worlds and made no trouble, and who had, in all that quiet time, evidently built something 3,000 spans long, and learned to hide it from the masters of hiding, and had only now, tonight, chosen to let one of them be seen. He thought, they have been pointing nothing outward. For 40 cycles they have been pointing nothing outward, on purpose, because that addendum is the only thing the Concord ever got right about them, and somewhere in the human records there is a copy of the same warning, written the other way around. Do not give them a reason. And the Marshal was inbound to give them a reason. The screening force arrived in a clean Concord formation, and Salik watched it bloom into the well with a sick certainty. It was not small. The Marshal had not come to bluff. 40 Concord cruisers slid out of their drive folds in a wide net around Threshold 9, long bright vessels with their running lights proud and their weapon rings already lit, and at their center came the Marshal's own command ship, a heavy gray spine of a vessel named, the registry said, the Unbroken Word. They were good ships. Salik did not pretend otherwise. The Concord had fought its share of border wars and put down its share of upstart species, and these were the ships that had done it, crewed by hard people who had never lost. 40 Concord cruisers and a command ship, against one survey vessel that called itself Quiet Lantern. Salik watched the cruisers settle into their net and felt the wrongness of it deep in his old bones. They were arranging themselves with care, taking their time, spreading into a textbook containment pattern, the kind the Concord had drilled for 1,000 cycles, the kind that worked on every enemy the Concord had ever beaten. Each cruiser took its assigned volume, each weapon ring lit to readiness. Each captain reported a clean field and a good position, and the formation tightened, beautiful and proud, around the single dark shape in the center. And the single dark shape did not move, and did not arm, and did not so much as turn its unlit flank, and Salik thought, they are dressing for a fight that the other side has already decided not to have, and they have mistaken its patience for fear. They think it is cornered, Doru said quietly beside him, reading the same thing in the well. Look at how they're closing. They think they've trapped a survey vessel that overreached. They're going to do this by the book, and the book is going to work, because the book has always worked. The book has never been written about anything like that, Salik said. No, Doru agreed. It has not. He was silent a moment, watching the net draw tight. I have been on the other side of that formation, envoy. 3 times. 3 border wars. I have watched ships I served on close a net like that around an enemy, and I have watched the enemy understand what it meant, and I have watched the enemy do the thing that cornered things do, which is panic, or surrender, or die. I know the shape of those 3 things. I have seen all of them. And that, he nodded at the dark hull in the center of the proud bright net, is not doing any of the 3. It is doing a 4th thing, and I do not have a name for the 4th thing, and that is what is making the back of my neck cold. It is waiting, Salik said. That is the 4th thing. It is waiting to see whether we are going to make a mistake that cannot be unmade. It asked us, 4 times, not to. And the Marshal is about to. Marshal on the deck channel, Doru said quietly. The loud voice returned, filling the command well. Threshold 9, observe. This is how the Concord answers a hole in the dark. The Unbroken Word opened a channel to the human vessel, and the whole sector heard it, because the Marshal wanted the whole sector to hear it. Unidentified vessel, the Marshal said, you are in violation of Concord border law. Your concealment is a hostile act. You will power down your drive, lower your shielding, and prepare to be boarded and seized. You have 9 minutes to comply. After 9 minutes, the screening force will open fire and reduce you to a salvage field. There is no appeal. Acknowledge. The human vessel acknowledged. That was the part that broke the Marshal's certainty, though it took a few seconds for anyone to see it. The human voice came back, still even, still unhurried, and it said, acknowledged. We understand your instruction. Before you act on it, we would like you to verify something for your own records. We believe there has been a mistake about what you are looking at. We are transmitting a correction now. Please take the time to read it. We will wait. We will not read your correction, the Marshal said. 8 minutes. We understand, the human voice said. "We will wait anyway." And then the human vessel did the thing that Salik would spend the rest of his life trying to describe to people who had not been there. It vanished. Not the way a cloaked ship vanishes, into a bent smear of light that a trained eye can still follow. It vanished completely, from every sensor on the station and every sensor in the screening force at once, as cleanly as if it had never been there, as if the 11 minutes and the 90 minutes and the even patient voice had all been a thing the Concorde had dreamed. The command deck made a sound, a low collective sound of 40 people losing the same certainty at the same moment. "Where?" Doru said. "Where did it go?" "It did not go anywhere," Salik said. He was very calm now, with the calm of a man watching a thing he has feared his whole life finally arrive. "It is exactly where it was. It is 3,000 spans long, and it is sitting still, and it has simply stopped letting us see it. That is what they do, Doru. We bend light. They do something else. They reach into what we are looking at, and they take themselves out of it, and there is nothing left to find. Not a smear, not a hole. Nothing." On the channel, the marshal's voice had lost a little of its loudness. "Screening force, reacquire. All sensors, full sweep. Find me that vessel." The screening force swept. 40 cruisers and a command ship poured every sense they had into the dark, and the dark gave them nothing back. And Salik watched the search patterns spread and tighten and spread again, and he watched them find nothing, because there was nothing to find that the humans were willing to let them find. 3 minutes passed. And then the human voice returned, and now it was not coming from any point in space, because there was no longer any vessel for it to come from. It came onto every Concorde channel at once, the screening force and the station, and the marshal's own private command line, all of them, threaded through encryptions that the Velmari had designed and sold across the Concorde as unbreakable. "You could not read our correction," the human voice said, "so we will say it plainly, because we would rather you understood than that you guessed. You believe you are looking at a survey vessel that broke a rule. You are not. You have never been able to see what you are looking at. You could not see us when we arrived. You cannot see us now. You did not see us 40 years ago, and you have not seen us in the 40 years since. And that was a kindness, Marshal. We let your station see us tonight because your border officer was polite to us, and politeness is a thing we keep accounts of. We let one ship be seen, once, so that someone here could acknowledge it, and we could go on our way, and no one would ever need to know how close they had stood to something they could not see. That was the whole of it. That was all we wanted. Acknowledgement. And then to leave. You are bluffing, the Marshal said, but the loudness was gone now, sanded down to something thinner. You are one vessel hiding behind a trick. Reacquire and fire. We are not one vessel, the human voice said. And the dark around Threshold 9, the empty dark that the 40 Concorde cruisers had just swept clean and found nothing in, the dark that the Masters of Unseeing had certified as empty, opened. It did not open the way a door opens. It opened the way an eye opens, all at once, in every direction, and where there had been nothing there were now ships. Salik did not count them at first. The number was too large to be a number. It was a condition, like weather. The well of the command deck filled with hulls, long dark hulls that drank the light, and they were not in a net or a formation, or any honest order that a fleet shows. They were everywhere. They were between the cruisers. They were behind the command ship. They were above the station and below it, and threaded through the screening force at distances so close that a Concorde cruiser, swinging blind, would have struck one. They had been there the entire time. They had been there when the screening force folded in. They had been there when the Marshal made his speech. They had been sitting in the dark, unseen, while 40 hard ships that had never lost arranged themselves into a net around a target that already surrounded them. "Count," Doru whispered. "Someone count them." 1100, said the thin, nervous officer at the panel, in a voice gone to nothing. 1140. They are still appearing. 1190. 1200. 1200 dark hulls, every one of them, at least the size of the thing that had first put a hole in the dark. Every one of them inside the screening force's guard. Every one of them having watched the Concorde prepare to fire on a single ship that had asked, 3 times, only to be acknowledged. The human voice spoke once more, and it was still even, and it was still unhurried, and that was the most terrible thing about it. "This is the Human Survey Group Quiet Lantern," it said. "We map the dark. That is our work. We have been mapping this region for 40 of your years. Quietly, because we found early on that the Concord does not like to be reminded of things it cannot see, and we had no wish to frighten anyone. We are not a war fleet, Marshal. We carry the tools of a war fleet because the dark is not always empty, and we have learned not to enter it unarmed. But we did not come here to fight you. We came here to pass through. We asked to be acknowledged. We were prepared to be refused, and to leave anyway. We were not prepared to be told to power down and be seized, because that is not a thing we can allow to happen to a survey group. And you have given us, in the last few minutes, every reason in the dark to point ourselves outward at you. We would prefer not to. So we are going to give you the courtesy your border officer tried to give us. We are going to acknowledge you, and then we are going to give you a choice." The Marshal did not answer. Salik understood why. He was looking at the same well the Marshal was looking at, across 100 light years, and he was seeing what the Marshal saw, which was 40 bright, proud ships with their weapon rings lit, sitting inside a school of 1,200 unlit ones, like fish that have just realized the water itself is full of larger fish, and have just realized further that the larger fish have been there the whole time, watching, deciding whether to be hungry. "I will tell you what we see," the human voice went on, gently, "because you could not see it yourselves, and a people should know where they are standing. Your screening force is in a containment lattice. We placed each of your cruisers inside a separate volume before you finished arriving. If you fire a single weapon, the lattice closes, and we will not damage your ships, because we do not need to. We will simply take them out of your sight, the way we are out of yours now. Your crews will live. They will breathe and eat and wake and sleep, and they will be somewhere, and no instrument the Concord owns will ever find them, and no signal will ever leave them. And in time the Concord will write them into a file as lost on a border, and the file will be true, and it will never once come close to what actually happened. That is what we can do, Marshal. We would rather not. The choice is yours." The Marshal's voice, when it finally came, had lost the last of its loudness. "What choice?" he said. "What is the choice?" "Acknowledge us," the human voice said. "That is all. The same thing we asked of the station. Acknowledge that you saw us, that we asked politely, that we broke no law, that we have the right to pass. Send the courtesy reply. Let us go on our way, and then forget us, as you have forgotten us for 40 years, and we will go back to mapping the dark, and you will go back to your border, and no one will ever have to learn how close any of this came to going another way. Or refuse. Fire your weapon, and teach your whole Concord, in one night, the thing you were so eager to teach a survey vessel, that a border means nothing to a thing it cannot see." The command deck of Threshold 9 was silent. In the well, the 40 bright ships sat inside the 1,200 dark ones, and the soft amber alarm kept its slow, patient blink on the ceiling, and Envoy Salik Tor, who had spent his whole life learning to give room to things that could see him when he could not see them, found that he was, against everything, beginning to hope. Because the humans had not fired. They had surrounded a hostile force completely. They had been threatened with seizure. They had been given every reason to point themselves outward, and they had not fired. They had asked, a fourth time, for the same small thing. They had asked to be acknowledged. And Salik thought, if a thing that strong asks 4 times for so little, then it does not want to be feared. It wants to be let alone. And a people that strong, that wants only to be let alone, is the safest neighbor in the dark, if you are wise enough to let it be. But the Marshal was not wise. The Marshal had never seen a hole in the dark and learned to be afraid of it. The Marshal had spent his whole career winning against species that could be seen, and he did not have, in all his hard certainty, the one thing the moment required, which was the humility to be acknowledged in return. "Marshal," Salik said, leaning into the channel, and now he did not keep his voice even. Now he let it shake, because he wanted the man to hear how afraid he was, wanted the fear to carry where his rank could not. "Marshal, send the courtesy. I am begging you. I have read the file. There is a line in our own file, written 60 cycles ago, that warns us never to give these people a reason to point everything outward at once. They are showing us, right now, what that looks like. They are showing us the smallest possible amount of it, and asking us, politely, to never see the rest. Send the courtesy. Let them go. There is no shame in acknowledging a neighbor you cannot see. There is only one kind of shame here, and it is the kind you do not survive. For a long moment the channel held nothing. Then the marshal spoke, and Salik heard, under the hard practiced certainty, the first thin crack of a man beginning, far too late, to understand exactly what he had done. "I do not acknowledge what I cannot understand," the marshal said. It was a sentence built to sound like strength, and Salik heard at once that it was the opposite. It was the sentence of a man who had been handed an exit and could not make his pride walk through it. The marshal was a Concord officer of the old hard mold, and his whole life had taught him that the thing you do not understand is the thing you destroy before it can teach you to fear it. He had never once been the smaller fish. He did not have the reflex. "Screening force," the marshal said. "Hold your fire and hold your nerve. We do not surrender a border to a trick. I want a firing solution on the nearest unidentified hull. One shot. We will see whether their lattice is real, or whether it is a story told by a survey vessel, that is, in the end, only a survey vessel." "Marshal, no," Salik said. "Threshold 9, your envoy is relieved of the channel," the marshal said. "Lieutenant Pell, target the nearest contact and prepare to fire on my word." On the unbroken word, somewhere across the dark, a gunnery officer named Pell did as ordered, because that is what a screening force does, and the targeting systems of the marshal's command ship reached out toward the nearest of the 1,200 dark hulls, the one sitting barely 200 spans off the command ship's flank, close enough that the firing solution was a formality. And the human voice, which had been silent through all of this, said one quiet thing. "We see you painting us," it said. "We would ask you not to. We will give you 10 seconds to take the lock off. We are not asking you to surrender. We are only asking you to stop aiming. There is a great deal of difference between the two, and we want you to have the chance to find it." "Fire," the marshal said. Lieutenant Pell fired. The unbroken word's main weapon was a lance of focused force that the Concorde had used to crack open rebel moons, and it crossed the 200 spans to the nearest dark hull in less time than it takes a heart to close, and Salik, watching the well, braced himself to see a human ship die. The lance struck nothing. In the instant before it arrived, the dark hull was simply no longer there, not destroyed, not moved. It had been taken out of the place where the weapon was aimed, the way a word is taken out of a sentence, and the lance passed through the volume where it had been and went on into the empty dark beyond, and it kept going, a bright thread of wasted force fading into the black, having hit nothing at all. And then the lattice closed. Salik had been told what it would look like, and still, it was nothing like what he had pictured. There was no flash, no fire, no enemy weapon answering. There was only a folding. Around the unbroken word, the dark itself seemed to hinge inward, smoothly and without violence, the way the petals of a flower fold in at dusk, and the great gray command ship of Fleet Marshal Oren Kavul, the heavy spine of a vessel that had cracked open rebel moons, slid into the fold and was gone. It did not explode. It did not break. The instruments of Threshold 9 recorded no death, no debris, no scream of failing metal. They recorded the unbroken word, full and whole and crude and alive, simply ceasing to be anywhere that any Concorde sensor could reach. One instant the command ship was there, firing, certain. The next instant the place where it had been was empty dark, and the ship was somewhere, and the somewhere was nowhere at all. The marshal's channel did not close. That was the worst of it. It stayed open, and for a few seconds Salik could hear him, the loud, certain voice now stripped down to a small, confused animal sound, saying where, saying what is this, saying I cannot see my own deck, saying it as if asking, would make the dark give an answer. And then the channel did not close so much as recede, the voice growing thin and far and strange, as if the man were being carried gently down a long corridor away from every door, and then there was only the soft hiss of an open line with nothing on the other end of it, and then there was not even that. The command deck of Threshold 9 did not make a sound. 40 officers, and Salik among them, looked into the well at the place where the marshal's command ship had been, and at the 39 other Concorde cruisers that still sat there, bright and proud and lit, inside the school of 1,200 dark hulls, and not one of those 39 cruisers moved a weapon, because they had all just watched the unbroken word fire one shot and cease to exist in a way that left no body to mourn. The human voice returned, and it was, against all reason, gentle. "Your marshal is alive," it said. "I want that understood, before fear writes the story for you. Every soul aboard the unbroken word is alive and unhurt, and breathing the same air they were breathing a minute ago. We did not kill them. We do not kill the people who fire on us, when we can help it, and we can almost always help it. We have simply put them where they can do no harm, and take no harm, and there they will stay, comfortable and confused, until this is over. If this ends well, we will give them back, every one of them. We will set the unbroken word down somewhere safe, and we will let it be found, with its crew whole and its weapons cold, and the only wound any of them will carry is the memory of having been somewhere they could not see. If this ends badly, they will simply stay. That is the whole of the threat. We thought you should hear it from us, plainly, rather than invent something worse." Across the screening force, the 39 remaining cruisers were not silent now. Salik could hear it spreading on the open band, the chatter of 40 crews that had just watched their flagship vanish, and it was not the chatter of soldiers, it was the chatter of people who had just learned, all at once, that everything they had ever believed about their own strength was a story told to children. He heard a gunnery deck somewhere reporting, in a voice that kept breaking, that its targeting system showed no contacts, none, the school of 1,200 hulls still there to the eye in the well, but invisible to every weapon they had, so that the cruisers could see the thing surrounding them and could not aim a single shot at it. He heard a junior officer ask, plainly, like a lost child, whether they were going to die. He heard no one answer, because no one knew. And under all of it, Salik heard the thing that frightened him most, which was the quality of the dark hulls themselves. They had not closed in. They had not pressed the advantage. After folding the flagship away, after proving beyond any argument what they could do, the 1,200 ships of Quiet Lantern had simply gone still again, holding their threaded positions, waiting, with that same terrible patience they had shown for the whole long night. They were not enjoying this. Salik understood that suddenly and completely, a cruel thing would have closed the net. A frightened thing would have fled. The humans were doing the one thing that no Concord doctrine had ever modeled, because no enemy the Concord had ever met had been strong enough to afford it. They were giving the Concord time to choose better. They were standing inside a force that had just fired on them, having taken its flagship without a scratch, and they were waiting, quietly, to see whether the survivors would be wiser than their marshal had been. A new voice came onto the channel then, a Concord voice, shaking. It was the senior captain of the screening force, the next in command after the marshal, a woman named Telsa Moore, and Salik could hear in her voice that she had just become the most frightened admiral in the history of the Concord, and was trying, with everything she had, not to let her crews hear it. "This is Captain Telsa Moore, assuming command of the screening force," she said. "Human vessel, I am ordering my ships to stand down. All weapons are cold. All targeting is dark. We are not aiming at you. We are not aiming at anything. Do you understand? We have stopped." "We understand," the human voice said, and Salik heard something in it that he had not heard before, something that might, in a creature so strong, have been relief. "Thank you, Captain. That was the right thing, and it was a hard thing, and we know the difference. You have done what your marshal could not. You have stopped aiming. We will remember that you were the one who did it." "What do you want?" Captain Moore said. "Tell me what you want and I will see that you have it. I am not the marshal. I am not going to win an argument with the dark. Tell me what ends this." "The same thing we have wanted since the first minute," the human voice said. "Acknowledgement. Send the courtesy reply, acknowledge that the survey group Quiet Lantern was here, that it broke no law, that it asked 4 times to simply be let pass, and that the Concord, in the end, let it pass. Log it honestly, and then we will give you back your marshal and his ship, and every soul aboard, and we will fold ourselves back into the dark, and you will not see us again unless you go looking, and we strongly advise that you do not go looking." "That is all," Captain Moore said. "Acknowledgement. After what you just did, that is all you ask." "That is all we have ever asked of anyone." the human voice said. "We are not a conquering people, Captain. We mapped the dark and found it full of older, hungrier things than your Concord, and we learned to hide from them, and then we learned to hide better than they could hunt, and somewhere in all that hiding, we became something that does not need to take anything from anyone, because the only thing we ever wanted was to be left alone, and we have made ourselves strong enough to simply have it. You cannot give us anything we want by force, and we cannot be made to want anything you have, so there is nothing to fight over. There has never been anything to fight over. Your marshal could not believe that, because a marshal is built to believe that everything is a thing to fight over. But you are not your marshal, so, acknowledge us, let us go, and let this be the night the Concord learned that the safest thing in the dark is a neighbor who only wants to be let alone." Captain Telsa Moore sent the courtesy reply. Salik watched it go out from the unbroken words sister ship, the formal Concord acknowledgement of safe passage, the same handful of words a Velmari child knew to give, the words the marshal had refused, and the words the human voice had asked for, gently, 4 times, before one shot had changed 40 hard certainties into one frightened wisdom. The acknowledgement crossed the dark, and the human vessel that had first put a hole in the night received it, and there was a pause, and then the human voice spoke one last time on the open channel, for all of them to hear. "Acknowledgement received and logged," it said. "Thank you, Captain Moore. Thank you, Threshold 9. And thank you, Envoy Salik Tor, who tried to give us the courtesy before anyone made him, and who told a marshal the truth when it cost him to do it. We keep accounts of such things. You will not see us, but we will know your name, and that is a safer thing to be than you can yet understand. We are releasing your marshal now. Watch your sensors." And on the command deck, the thin, nervous officer at the panel made a small, broken sound, and pointed, and in the well, where there had been only empty dark, the unbroken word folded back into being, whole and lit and confused, its weapons cold, its crew alive, its great gray spine turning slowly, as if waking from a sleep it could not remember entering. The screening force found the marshal's command ship adrift and unharmed, and they found the marshal aboard it, alive, and Salik would learn later that Fleet Marshal Oren Kavul never gave another order in his life, that he sat on the deck of his recovered ship and stared at the place where the dark had taken him, and could not be made to speak of it, and that the Concord quietly retired him, and that for the rest of his days he would wake in the night certain that he was somewhere he could not see. But that was later. In the well of Threshold 9, in the gray hours of the night cycle, the 1,200 dark hulls of the survey group Quiet Lantern began, one by one, to do the thing they had done at the start, the thing the Masters of Unseeing had no word for. They began to stop being seen, not to bend the light, not to leave a smear, simply, gently, to take themselves out of what the Concord was looking at, until the well was nothing but stars again, and the 39 cruisers, and the recovered command ship, and the soft amber alarm on the ceiling that had, at last, stopped its slow, patient blink. The hole in the dark had closed. The command deck of Threshold 9 stayed silent for a long time after the last hull went out of sight. No one moved to file a report. No one knew how to file it. Doru stood at the rail with both broad hands flat on the metal, as if he needed to hold on to something that was certainly there, and the thin, nervous officer sat at his panel and stared at the clean, empty field where 1,200 ships had been, and the young station officer with the pale crest, the one who had caught Salik's arm in the corridor at the start of the night, stood in the hatchway weeping without sound. It was Doru who finally spoke, and his voice was rough. "We fired on them," he said. "We surrounded them, and we fired on them, and we told them to power down and be seized, and they took a marshal who shot at them, kept him safe, gave him back, and asked us, the whole time, only to say that we had seen them. That is all." He turned to Salik, "Envoy, in 30 cycles of service, I have never once been ashamed of the Concord. Tonight, I am ashamed, and I do not know what to do with it, because the thing I am ashamed in front of was kind to us, and kindness from something that's strong is harder to bear than any cruelty would have been. If they had hurt us, I could hate them. They did not hurt us. They were better than us, and they let us see it, and then they let us live. That is the lesson," Salik said quietly. "That is the whole lesson, and it is the hardest one our people will ever have to learn, Because we are old and proud, and we have spent 10,000 cycles being the cleverest thing in the dark. Tonight we met something that did not need to be clever, because it was simply kind, and strong enough to afford it. We will spend a long time, Doru, learning to be grateful instead of afraid. Some of us never will, but you have started tonight, and that is more than the Marshal managed, and it will matter. He looked once more at the well, at the slow-turning bowl of stars, whole and quiet and safe, with no sign anywhere in it that anything had happened at all. And Envoy Salik Tor, alone among all of them, was not afraid anymore. The Concord did not learn its lesson all at once. Salik had not expected it to. Lessons that arrive in a single terrible night take a long time to settle into a body as old and as proud as the Concord of settled light. He carried the report inward himself. He would not trust it to a relay. He flew to the inner worlds, to the great ringed council station, where the Concord's high authorities sat in their tiers, and he stood before them in his envoy's robe, a thin gray creature who arranged the seating at dinners, and he told them, plainly and without softening, what had happened at Threshold 9. They did not believe him. That was the first response, and it came mostly from the war tier, from the admirals and the marshals and the hard certain people who had spent their lives winning against things they could see. One survey vessel, they said, one concealment trick and a frightened border crew, and an envoy with a long memory and a longer imagination. 1,200 hulls, they said, and laughed, the way the Marshal had laughed. There is no fleet of 1,200 capital hulls in the entire dark, not the Concord's, not anyone's. You saw 40 cruisers panic at a clever cloak. You did not see the dark open like an eye. Salik let them laugh. When they were done, he played them the records. He played them the 11 minutes of nothing becoming a hole in the dark. He played them the sweep of 40 cruisers finding emptiness. He played them the moment the dark opened, and the count climbing, 1,100, 1,200, and the laughter in the council chamber thinned and went out like a lamp in a draught. And then he played them the lance from the unbroken word, passing through a place where a ship had been and was no longer, hitting nothing, and the smooth folding of the dark around the Marshal's command ship, and the open channel, with the loud certain voice on it, going thin and far and strange, and then gone. The council was very quiet after that. You will say, Salik told them, into the quiet, that they could have lied, that the records could be made. I have thought of that. I have thought of nothing else for the whole flight inward, and I will tell you why I do not believe it, and then you may decide for yourselves, because you outrank me, and I am only an envoy. I do not believe it because of what they asked for. A people who could fake all of this, who could put 1,200 false hulls into a record to frighten us, would have asked us for something. Tribute, territory, a treaty bent in their favor, anything. That is what a lie is for. It is for taking. And in the whole of that night, across every channel, the humans asked us for exactly one thing, 4 times, and the thing they asked for was that we acknowledge they had been there and then let them leave. You do not build a lie that vast to ask for nothing. You only show that much truth, that gently, when the truth is the only thing you have, and when you would very much prefer not to have to show any more of it. An old counselor of the first tier, a Velmari even older than Salik, leaned forward then. Her name was Counselor Ilith, and she had been on the council longer than most of the war tier had been alive, and she had the patient gray stillness of someone who had outlived a great many certainties. You believe they were being kind, she said. I believe they were being careful, Salik said. Which, from a thing that's strong, is the same as kind. A weak people is kind because it must be. A strong people is kind because it chooses to be, and the choosing is worth 1,000 times more. They could have taken the screening force apart and left no body to bury. They could have taken Threshold 9. They could have taken this station, this council, you and me, and there is not one thing in the Concord's whole arsenal that I now believe could have stopped them. And they took a marshal who fired on them, held him gently, and gave him back, whole. That is not weakness, counselor. That is the most frightening kind of strength there is. It is strength with nothing it needs from us. Counselor Ilith was quiet for a long moment. Then we will do the thing the envoy advised at the border, she said at last. We will acknowledge them. We will log this honestly. We will leave them alone. And we will pray to whatever old patient thing watches over careful peoples, that they continue to want only to be left alone. The council voted, that first time, to do exactly that. The vote was not clean. A third of the war tier abstained, and a handful voted against, and Salik flew back out toward the border believing, for a few short days, that the worst of it was behind him. He was wrong, and the proof of it had nothing to do with the Hesh, who came later. The proof came first from a small mining colony called Drell's Reach, a Concord outpost so far out and so poor that the inner worlds barely remembered it existed. Drell's Reach was a single rock with 2,000 souls on it, scratching ore out of a cold moon at the very edge of the chartered lanes, the kind of place the Concord taxed and otherwise ignored. And while the council argued in its warm ringed chamber, a vessel had come to Drell's Reach out of the deep dark that was not a Concord vessel, and not a human one, a long, ugly raider of a people called the Scare, who lived past the Concord's edge and took what they could when no one was watching. The Scare had heard the same rumor the Hesh had heard, the rumor of a great hidden fleet somewhere in the lanes, and they had drawn from it exactly the wrong lesson. They had decided that if the Concord's own border was being haunted by ghosts, then the Concord's far colonies were being watched by no one at all, and a watched border with an unwatched back is a thing a raider lives for. So the Scare came to Drell's Reach to take it. 2,000 souls, a cold moon, an undefended rock at the edge of everything. The colony's distress call went out and crossed the dark toward an inner fleet that was 9 days away, and the colonists of Drell's Reach, who knew exactly how far away 9 days was, gathered their children into the deepest tunnels and prepared to die or be sold, because that is what happened to small far places when a raider found them and help was 9 days out. Salik heard the distress call relayed through Threshold 9, and he stood at the rail of the command well and felt the old helplessness, the envoy's helplessness, the helplessness of a man who arranges the seating at dinners while 2,000 people prepare to be taken. There was nothing the Concord could do. There was nothing he could do. But Drell's Reach was inside the dark the humans mapped. The Skur Raider was on its final approach, its boarding lines already deploying toward the colony's locks, when the dark beside it opened the way an eye opens, and one long unlit hull was simply there, between the raider and the rock, 3,000 spans of it, drinking the light. The Scare had time to fire once. The shot passed through a place where the human hull had been, and was no longer, and went on into the empty dark, and then the dark folded, gently, the way it had folded around a marshal's command ship, and the Scare Raider, and its whole crew of takers, slid into the fold, and ceased to be anywhere that any sensor could reach. The humans did not speak to Drell's Reach. They did not announce themselves. The colonists, huddled in their tunnels, knew only that a raider had been about to breach their locks, and then, between one breath and the next, was not there anymore. That the distress board went from a death sentence to a clean, empty field, and that no one ever explained why. The inner fleet arrived 9 days later to find 2,000 frightened, baffled, living colonists, and a colony entirely intact, and a story the fleet captain wrote up as a raider that had inexplicably broken off its attack and fled. Salik knew better. He had watched the relay. He had seen the dark open and close around the raider in the well of Threshold 9, and he understood that the humans had just protected 2,000 Concord souls who had never acknowledged them, would never know they existed, and could give them nothing in return. They had not done it for thanks. They had done it because the souls were inside the dark they kept, and that, it turned out, was the whole of the reason they needed. He carried that inward too, to the council, and it landed harder than the records of Threshold 9 had landed, because a marshal who fires on a stranger and gets a fright is an abstraction, but 2,000 miners who would have been sold and were not, saved by a hand they could not see and did not earn, is a thing that gets into the heart of even a hard people. The council heard it. Most of the council heard it. But the Hesh did not hear it the way the council heard it. The Hesh were not Velmari. They were a younger and harder species of the war tier, a people who had risen fast through the Concord on a talent for hunting, and they did not like the word leave them alone. They had not been at Threshold 9, and they had not been at Drell's Reach. They had only seen the records, and the records had told them a thing the rest of the council had been too frightened to hear, which was that somewhere in the dark there was a fleet of 1,200 capital hulls that nobody had ever found, and that a fleet you cannot find is a fleet you cannot count, and a thing you cannot count is the most valuable prize a hunting people can imagine, because whoever finds it first owns a secret the whole Concord would pay any price to learn. The Hesh did not announce what they were going to do. Hunters never do. Salik argued against them before they ever left. He stood in the war tier's own chamber, a thin gray envoy among hard-armored hunters, and he told them, as plainly as he had told the marshal, that they were about to make the same mistake on a larger map. He told them about the addendum, the line written 60 cycles ago, the warning not to give the humans a reason. He told them what he had watched at the border with his own eyes, and what he had watched happen at Drell's Reach, where the humans had spent themselves protecting strangers who could never thank them. He told them that you do not hunt a thing that has chosen, again and again, not to hunt you, because the only thing you can teach it by hunting it is that the choosing was a mistake. The Hesh listened the way hunters listen, which is to say they heard him and filed it under fear. A hunting people has its own old story, and the story says that the thing which hides is the thing which can be found, and the thing which can be found can be taken, and the only animals that cannot be caught are the ones no one has hunted properly yet. They did not believe in a prey that could not be run down. It was not in them to believe it. It would have unmade the thing they were. You arrange the seating at dinners, the Hesh war leader told Salik, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. We catch what runs. Let each people do what it is for. They took their best vessel, a long, sleek predator ship called the Keen Edge, crewed by their finest trackers, and they fitted it with every sensor the Concord possessed, and 3 the Concord had only theorized, and they went out to the border, to the lane the humans had used, and they began to hunt the hole in the dark. They were good at it, that must be said. The Hesh were the best hunters the Concord had, and they had tracked things across the dark that nothing else could track, and they went into the lane certain, the way the marshal had been certain, that there was no prey in the dark that a Hesh could not run down. Salik learned of it too late to stop it. He learned of it the way he had learned of the first night, from a quiet alarm, an envoy's channel opening in the gray hours, a voice telling him the Hesh had gone hunting and would not answer. He went to the border again. He did not know what he thought he could do. He was an envoy. He arranged the seating at dinners, but he could not sit in the inner worlds and let another hard, certain people walk into the dark to take from a thing that wanted only to be left alone, and so he went, and he was at Threshold 9 again, at the rail of the same command well, when the Keen Edge found what it was hunting. It found the humans the way you find a cliff in fog, which is all at once and too late. The Hesh later swore that their sensors had been clean for 9 days. 9 days of hunting the lane, refining the search, certain the prey was just ahead, just past the next sweep. And on the 9th day the Keen Edge's record simply stopped, mid-sweep, without alarm, the way the marshal's channel had gone thin and far, and the long, sleek predator ship of the best hunters in the Concord ceased to report. But this time, the humans sent a message back themselves, to Threshold 9, to Salik, because they kept accounts, and they knew his name. Envoy Salik Tor, the even voice said, and Salik felt his 3 hearts turn over to hear it again. We are sorry to trouble you. We know this was not your doing. We want you to carry a message inward, because you are believed there, and we are not, and we would rather be understood than feared, even now, even after this. A vessel of your Concord has spent 9 days hunting us. We let it. We wanted to be sure of what it intended before we acted, because we do not punish curiosity, and for a time, we hoped it was only curious. It was not. It intended to find us, and fix our position, and sell it. We have that intention in its own records, in its own captain's voice. So we have done what we did to the marshal, and no more. The Keen Edge is held. Its crew is alive and unhurt and confused, and they will stay that way, comfortable and safe, until you come for them. We are not going to harm them, but we are not going to give them back to the Hesh, who would only send them out again. We are going to give them back to you, to an envoy, to the one person in your whole Concord who tried to be courteous to us before he had any reason to fear us. We will set the Keen Edge down at the border, whole, and you will be the one to recover it, and the Hesh will have to come to you to get their hunters back. And that, envoy, is the only punishment we are going to ask for. We are going to make the people who hunted us owe their lives to the people who were kind to us. We find it is the only kind of lesson that lasts. Salik stood at the rail and could not speak. "Tell them inward," the human voice went on, gently, "that the dark is not empty, and that we are not the worst thing in it, and that the only reason they have never met the worst things is that the worst things have never had a reason to come this way. We are the reason. We sit between your concord and the older hungers, and we map the dark so that we will always see them coming, and we hide so well that they have stopped looking this direction, because there is nothing here they can find. That is the gift we have been giving you for 40 years, Envoy, without ever once being thanked for it, because you could not see it, and we did not want you to. We would have gone on giving it forever in silence. We still will. But we would ask, just once, through you, that the Concord stop sending its certain people into the dark to take from us. Not because they could hurt us, they cannot, but because every time they try, we have to remind them that they cannot, and the reminding frightens everyone, and we have grown very tired of being frightening to people we are only trying to protect." And then the even voice was quiet, and a little later the keen edge folded back into being at the border, whole and lit and confused, its hunters alive, its sensors cold, exactly as promised. Salik recovered it himself. He took a small, unarmed cutter to the place at the border where the keen edge had been set down, and he boarded it alone, because he wanted no escort of frightened soldiers to make the moment into something it was not. The Predator ship was whole and unmarked. Its corridors were lit. Its air was warm. Its great bank of sensors, the three the Concorde had only theorized, and the dozens it had built, sat cold and dark, every one of them, as if a single patient hand had reached through the hull and turned off the ship's eyes without disturbing anything else. He found the hunters on the bridge, the finest trackers of the finest hunting people in the Concorde, and they were not harmed, and they were not bound, and they were not even truly afraid anymore. They were lost. They sat among their cold instruments, and looked at him with the faces of people who had set out to catch something, and woken to find that 9 days had passed in what felt to them like a single held breath, and that they could not say where they had been, only that wherever it was, it had been quiet and safe, and entirely without doors. One of them, a young tracker, asked Salik in a small voice whether the thing they had hunted had been angry. Salik told him the truth. He told him it had not been angry. It had been disappointed and patient, and it had given them back to the one person in the Concorde who had asked it not to be hunted, and that this was the gentlest thing a hunted creature had ever done to the people who hunted it, and that the young tracker should think about that for the rest of his life. He stood on the bridge of the recovered keen edge, among the dazed Hesh trackers, and he thought about the human voice, and about the thing it had said, that he had not expected, and could not stop turning over. We sit between your Concorde and the older hungers. He had spent his whole life afraid of the thing in the dark that could see him when he could not see it, and the thing in the dark, it turned out, had spent 40 years standing between him and something worse, asking for nothing, taking nothing, wanting only to be left alone to do it. He carried that message inward too, and this time, the council listened, because this time, the War Tier's own best hunters had gone into the dark certain, and come back as a gift, owing their lives to an envoy, and there is no argument a hunting people understands faster than that one. The Hesh war leader came to Salik's quarters on the council station, alone, without armor, which no Hesh did, and stood a long time and said nothing, and then said only that he had been wrong, and that he would not forget it, and then left. It was the closest thing to an apology a hunting people had words for, and Salik accepted it as the whole of one, because it was. But Salik knew, even then, that one more thing had to happen before any of it would truly settle. The Concorde had now learned, 3 times, at a border and a colony, and in the recovery of its own best hunters, that it could not take from the humans, and that the humans would shelter even those who tried. It had not yet learned the other half, the half the human voice had been trying to give it from the very first minute of the very first night. It had not yet learned what the humans were protecting it from. And out at the edge of the lane, in the dark the humans mapped so the Concorde would not have to, that other half was already coming. The thing that came out of the deep dark had no name the Concorde knew, and it did not put a hole in the night the way the humans had. It did the opposite. It put out the night. Salik was still at Threshold 9 when it happened. He had stayed, against the council's instruction, because something in the human voice had told him to stay, and he had learned by then to trust the things that voice told him. So he was at the rail of the command well, in the gray hours, 3 days after he recovered the keen edge, when the long-range net began, one beacon at a time, to go silent. Not to alarm, to go silent. The far beacons of the border, the lonely watch stations strung across the edge of the Concorde, stopped reporting in a slow rolling wave, each one winking out a little closer than the last, and there was no signal of attack, no cry of weapons, nothing but a creeping edge of nothing, eating its way inward along the lane. "What is that?" Doru said. The heavy-set watch commander had been transferred away after the first night, and had asked, quietly, to be transferred back, because he could not stop thinking about the dark, and the Concorde, not knowing what else to do with a man like that, had let him return. "Salik, what is doing that?" "That," Salik said, "is the other half." The wave of silence reached the third beacon out, and the second, and Threshold 9's own long-range sensors began to fill with a reading that none of the station's instruments had a category for. It was not an energy signature. It was an absence, a spreading region of the dark where the stars themselves grew dim and then went out, not eclipsed but erased, as if something vast were drinking the light the way the human hulls drank the station's lamps. Only this thing drank everything, the stars, the beacons, the very background glow of the distant galaxy, leaving behind a growing patch of true black that came on slowly, and did not stop. And in that black, the station's instruments began, at the very edge of their reach, to find a shape. It was bigger than the human survey group. It was bigger than anything. Salik could not hold the scale of it in his mind. It was not a ship. It was a region, a slow, vast hunger that had been sleeping somewhere in the deep dark for longer than the Concorde had existed, and something had woken it, or it had simply finished a long meal somewhere else, and turned, in its patient, ancient way, toward the faint warmth of the Concorde of settled light. This was the older hunger. This was the thing the humans had been standing between the Concorde and, for 40 silent years, asking for nothing. "It's 100 times our reach across," the thin, nervous officer whispered, and his voice had no bottom in it. "It's not a fleet. It's one thing. It's one thing, and it's bigger than a fleet, and it's coming up the lane, and the beacons aren't being destroyed. They're being unmade. The readings just stop. There's no debris. There's nothing. It's like they were never there." Salik gripped the rail. He understood, now, the whole of it. He understood why a people would learn to hide better than anything could hunt. He understood why they would map the dark with such patient care, why they would carry the tools of a war fleet on a survey vessel, why they would sit unseen between the Concorde and the edge, and ask for nothing but to be acknowledged. They had not been hiding from the Concorde. The Concorde was a child they were sheltering. They had been hiding from this. They had been watching for this. They had built 1,200 capital hulls and learned to take themselves out of the dark itself, not to conquer a Concorde that could not see them, but to be ready, on the night this old patient hunger finally turned their way, to stand between it and the warm small worlds behind them. And tonight was that night. "Where are they?" Doru said. "The humans. Where are they?" "They are already here," Salik said. "They have been here the whole time. Watch." The older hunger came up the lane, drinking the light, a wall of advancing black that swallowed the second beacon and reached for the first. And behind the first beacon, there was nothing but Threshold 9, and then the warm inner worlds, and then the whole soft, bright Concorde, billions of lives that had never once looked up and wondered what it was that kept the deep dark at bay. And the dark in front of the hunger opened like an eye. This time, Salik was not afraid. This time he watched it the way you watch a thing you have learned, against all your instincts, to love. The 1,200 dark hulls of the survey group Quiet Lantern unfolded out of the unseen, not in a panicked school this time, but in a wall of their own, a deliberate ordered wall set squarely across the lane between the advancing hunger and the first beacon, between the deep dark and the warm worlds, and at their center hung the long unlit shape that had, on the first night, put the very first hole in the dark. The even voice came onto Threshold 9's channel, and it was not gentle now. It was not unhurried. It was the voice of a people doing the thing they had built themselves over 40 years to do, and there was in it, under the steadiness, something that Salik could only call joy, the terrible clean joy of a guardian who has waited a long time and is, at last, exactly where it was always meant to be. "This is the survey group Quiet Lantern," it said, "to Threshold 9, to the Concord, to Envoy Salik Tor. Do not run. Running will not help you and we will not need you to. Hold your station and watch. Because after tonight, your council will never again ask why we hide, and we would rather you saw the answer than were only told it. The thing in front of us is older than your Concord, and ours together. It eats light. It eats the small drives of small ships, and the great cores of great ones, and it has eaten whole peoples that never knew it had woken. We have been waiting for it to turn this way for 40 of your years. We are glad it chose tonight, while you were watching, because you needed to see this, and we needed you, just once, to understand what your border has actually been for. Hold, and watch what humanity does to the things that come for the people it has decided to keep." And then the wall of human hulls did the thing the Concord had no word for, all 1,200 at once, and turned it outward. They did not fire weapons into the hunger. Salik understood, watching, that there was nothing to fire at. The hunger was not a ship, it was an absence, and you cannot lance an absence. Instead, the human wall did to the hunger what it had done to the Marshal's command ship, what it had done to the Keen Edge, only vast, only turned the wrong way around, only aimed not at taking a thing out of the dark, but at giving the dark back to the thing it had drunk. Where the human hulls reached, the swallowed light returned. The erased stars came back, one, and then 1,000, and then a sky full, blooming into being across the black wound of the hunger, like lamps relit in a house at dawn. And the hunger, which had spent an age unmaking the dark into its own hunger, met for the first time a thing that could unmake the hunger right back. It recoiled. Salik saw it recoil. The vast advancing wall of black, which had swallowed beacons without slowing, which had eaten whole peoples that never knew it had woken, met the wall of 1,200 human hulls turning the dark inside out, and it stopped. And for the first time in an age beyond counting, the older hunger of the deep dark drew back from something it could not eat. "It has never been refused," the human voice said, and now the joy in it was plain. Look at it. In all its long age, it has never once been refused, and it does not understand what is happening. And that is the whole of our weapon, Envoy. We do not destroy it. You cannot destroy a thing like that any more than you can destroy a winter. You can only teach it that this direction is closed, that this warmth has a wall around it, that the small bright Concord behind us is a thing it cannot reach, will never reach, has been unable to reach for 40 years without ever knowing why. We are going to teach it that lesson again tonight, the way we have taught it 100 times in the silent dark you never saw, and it is going to turn, and it is going to go and look for an easier meal somewhere your council will never have to hear about, and you are going to live, and your children are going to live, and not one of them will ever know how close it came, because we will fold ourselves back into the dark before the dawn cycle, and you will tell yourselves it was a sensor fault on the border. The hunger pushed once more. Salik saw the human wall bend under it, the 1,200 hulls giving a span of ground, and his 3 hearts seized, and then he saw the wall hold, and brighten, and push back, the swallowed sky blooming wider and wider, until the hunger's black wound was shrinking faster than it could spread, and the vast old absence in the lane crumpled inward on itself, refused, and at last, slowly, with the terrible patience of a thing that has all of time, it turned. It went back down the lane the way it had come. The far beacons winked back into life behind it, one and then another, the rolling wave of silence reversing into a rolling wave of light, until the long-range net of the Concord was whole again, every lonely watch station reporting in, none of them aware that anything at all had happened in the gray hours of the night cycle, that a thing older than the Concord had reached for them and been turned away at a wall they could not see. And the human wall held its line until the hunger was gone past the edge of every sensor, until the deep dark had swallowed it again, until the lane was only stars. Then the even voice spoke one last time. "It is done," it said. "It will not come this way again for a long while. They are slow to forget a wall, and slow to find a new direction, and by the time it turns back this way, the wall will still be here, because we will still be here, because this is what we are for. Envoy Salik Tor, Carry this inward. Tell them what you saw. Tell them that the night a human vessel decloaked at their border was not the night they nearly lost a marshal to a clever trick. Tell them it was the night they finally got to see, with their own eyes, the thing that has been keeping them alive in the dark since before they ever met us. And the people who have been doing the keeping, asking for nothing, year after silent year, except that once, just once, someone be courteous enough to acknowledge them. You were that someone. On the first night, you were that someone. Before you had any reason to be. We have not forgotten. We will not forget. Be well, envoy. Sleep without fear. There is a wall around your sky, and it loves the people it cannot be seen by, and it is not going anywhere. And then, one by one, the 1,200 dark hulls of the survey group Quiet Lantern began to do the thing the masters of unseeing had no word for. They began to stop being seen, not to bend the light, not to leave a smear. Simply, gently, to take themselves out of what the Concorde was looking at, the wall folding itself back into the dark it guarded, until the well of Threshold 9 showed nothing but the slow-turning bowl of stars, whole and bright and safe, exactly as it had always looked, exactly as it would look to every soul in the Concorde who would never know the difference. The hole in the dark had closed for the last time. Salik Tor stood at the rail of the command well in the gray hours of the dawn cycle, an old gray envoy who arranged the seating at dinners, and he wept, quietly, the way his people wept, without sound, because he had spent his whole long life afraid of the thing in the dark that could see him when he could not see it. And he had learned, at the very end of that life, that the thing in the dark had been standing in front of him the entire time, between him and the true hunger, asking only to be acknowledged. He carried the message inward. He stood before the council one last time, and this time he did not have to argue, because the war tier had seen the long-range net go dark and come back, had seen a thing 100 times the reach of any fleet turn away from a wall it could not pierce, and the hunting people among them had gone very, very quiet, the way hunters go quiet when they finally meet the thing that hunts the things they hunt. We made a mistake, Councillor Ilith said, in the great ringed chamber, and the whole council heard her say it, the oldest authority of the Concord of Settled Light, admitting before the assembled tiers what no Concord council had ever admitted. On the night the human vessel decloaked, we believed we were the strong ones, looking at a weak thing that had broken our rules. We understood our mistake far too late. We were never the strong ones. We were the sheltered ones, and the thing we ordered to kneel was the only reason there was anything left to do the ordering. She was quiet a moment. We will acknowledge them, formally, in the highest record the Concord keeps. We will write into our law that the people called human are not to be hunted, not to be sought, not to be troubled, and that any vessel that goes into the dark to take from them goes without the Concord's blessing and against the Concord's command. And we will write one thing more, in the oldest plain language we have, so that no marshal 1,000 cycles from now mistakes it for a story. We will write that there is a wall around our sky, that we cannot see it, that it loves us anyway, and that the only thing it has ever asked of us is that we be wise enough to let it. The council voted, and it was done, and the record was sealed, and the Concord of Settled Light went on with its long, careful life, billions of souls under a bright, safe sky, almost none of whom would ever know what the night cycle of the dawn beacon had so nearly cost them, or who had paid it, asking for nothing. In the cycles that followed, the change spread quietly through the Concord, in the way that true changes do, never announced. The border stations stopped challenging the holes in the dark when they appeared, and they appeared more often now, because the humans had stopped needing to hide quite so carefully from a people who had finally learned to give them room. A border officer would see the slow amber blink, and would send the courtesy reply, the small handful of words, and the hole in the dark would receive it and pass on, and nothing more would ever come of it, which was exactly the point. The young station officer with the pale crest, the one who had caught Salik's arm on the first night, grew into a watch commander of her own, and she taught every officer under her the one rule that mattered on a border, which was not a rule about weapons or law or protocol. It was a rule about courtesy. When something can see you, and you cannot see it, she taught them, you do not give it orders, you give it room, and then you thank it, quietly, for the room it has been giving you all along. Envoy Salik Tor lived 4 more cycles. He spent them at Threshold 9, which he requested as his final posting, and which the council granted, because no one could quite refuse him anything anymore. He sat many nights at the rail of the command well, and looked out at the slow-turning bowl of stars, and he never once saw the wall, because the wall did not wish to be seen, and that was as it should be. But sometimes, in the gray hours, the soft amber alarm on the ceiling would give a single slow blink, just one, and then go still, and Salik came to understand that it was not a fault, and it was not a malfunction, and it was not a hole in the dark. It was a greeting, from a neighbor he could not see, who had not forgotten his name, who was out there in the dark he had feared his whole life, keeping the wall, loving the people it would never be known by, and letting one old gray envoy know, in the only way it safely could, that it was still there. And every time, Salik Tor lifted one thin hand toward the well, toward the stars, and acknowledged it. Then he slept, without fear, under a dark that had never once been empty, and never would be.